My name is Amen Shah. I've always been the overlooked one in my family. The quiet daughter, the one who was good enough to be useful, but never worthy enough to be celebrated. My sister Anila was the golden child, adored for her beauty and charm. My brother Rehan was the pride of the family, a successful businessman who walked into any room and made everyone listen. And then there was me, always in the shadows, always trying to earn a place that never really belonged to me. That night, our extended family had arranged a fancy dinner at one of the city's most prestigious five-star restaurants. The occasion was my aunt's birthday, but the real purpose was always the same: showing off wealth, status, and children who were worth something. When I slipped into my pale blue dress, the best one I owned, I actually felt a little spark of hope. I looked in the mirror and whispered to myself, maybe tonight will be different. Maybe tonight they'll see me. I brushed my hair until it shined, dabbed on a bit of lipstick, and told myself to walk in with confidence. The restaurant glowed with golden chandeliers, tall white roses on every table, and the expensive fragrance of imported candles. Everyone was laughing, clinking glasses, hugging. Anila, in her scarlet designer gown, stood at the center like a queen surrounded by admirers. Rehan was already deep in conversation with the uncles and older cousins, throwing around words like investment and profits, while people nodded with admiration. And me? I walked in quietly, scanning the room for my place. That's when I saw it. Tucked into a corner of the hall was a small table covered with cartoon-printed napkins and colorful plates. Juice boxes instead of wine glasses. High chairs and squealing toddlers, and at that table, there was a seat card with my name on it. I froze, my heart slamming against my chest. I turned to my mother, whispering desperately, "Mom, this table is for kids." She didn't even glance at me. "The adult tables are full. Sit there." "It doesn't matter. You're fine. Doesn't matter." That phrase echoed like thunder in my head. I sat down among 5-year-olds. They screamed, spilled orange juice, fought over crayons. One boy tilted his head at me curiously and asked, "Why are you sitting here?" "You're not a kid." I forced a smile I didn't feel. My hands shook as I unfolded the cartoon napkin. Then, across the hall, I caught sight of Anila. She was laughing with her best friend, pointing at me, and whispering something that made them both burst out laughing. Rehan smirked across his wine glass, eyes glinting with mockery. My siblings, my blood, the people I'd sacrificed for, defended, and loved without limits. And now they were enjoying my humiliation like it was dessert. I couldn't eat. Every bite felt like ash in my throat. My eyes burned, but I blinked furiously, refusing to let the tears fall in public. The children next to me laughed, shouted, spilled, and lived their carefree lives. And I sat there like an outsider, like a joke, like someone who never truly belonged anywhere. "Remember this, Amen," I told myself. "Don't you dare forget this night. Don't you dare forget how they laughed while you broke inside." When the cake was brought out, the adults gathered around, singing and clapping, their backs turned to me. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood silent. Nobody noticed I was gone. Nobody. I slipped out of the glowing hall into the cold night air, my chest aching like I'd been stabbed. And right there, under the neon lights of the restaurant sign, I swore to myself, this isn't the end. This is the beginning. They think I'm weak, invisible, unworthy, but one day soon I'll make them choke on their own laughter. The night of that humiliation never left me. I woke the next morning with swollen eyes, replaying every cruel smirk, every mocking glance, every dismissive shrug. My family had cut me into pieces without raising their voices. That was the genius of their cruelty. Always subtle, always quiet, always disguised as harmless. But deep inside me, something broke. Something also awakened. For years, I had been the family's quiet background, always giving, never asking. They trained me to believe my place was on the sidelines. But that night at the children's table showed me a truth sharper than glass. They would never respect me until I forced them to, and so began the planning. I didn't confront anyone immediately. That's the mistake most people make. They explode too soon, give away their rage, and let others prepare defenses. No, I played the role they expected. The quiet, invisible Amen at breakfasts. I poured tea for everyone. At family gatherings, I smiled politely. I listened to Anila's endless talk about her beauty pageants, nodded when Rehan boasted about business deals, and even laughed at their jokes. But behind the smile, my mind was sharp as a blade, carving out a blueprint. They want to treat me like a child? Then I'll show them how dangerous their child can be. Every strong revenge begins with observation. I began to watch my family closely, not as their daughter or sister, but as an outsider analyzing prey. Anila's weakness, vanity. She thrived on admiration. Every compliment fed her like oxygen, but she couldn't tolerate being overshadowed. If her beauty, her charm, her princess image cracked even slightly, she fell into panic. Rehan's weakness, reputation. He lived for status. His identity was tied to being the successful son, the businessman everyone admired. But his deals weren't always clean. I had overheard whispers of shady partnerships, debts hidden behind polished smiles. If his perfect mask slipped, he would crumble. My parents' weakness, pride in their children. They treated me like an afterthought, but they flaunted Anila and Rehan like trophies. Their social standing rested on my siblings' supposed perfection. I had my targets. All I needed was timing. Revenge doesn't happen overnight. It must be planted like a seed, watered and nurtured until it grows strong enough to strangle. I started with Anila. One evening, while she was bragging to our relatives about her upcoming modeling shoot, I casually leaned over and said, "Oh, didn't you hear? The agency is replacing you with someone new. I overheard one of your friends mention it." Her face froze, a flicker of panic in her eyes before she laughed it off. But the seed was planted. In the days that followed, I dropped little hints, anonymously sent her cryptic messages on social media, left fake comments suggesting younger, prettier girls were replacing her. She grew restless, insecure, and for the first time in years, the mirror didn't calm her. For Rehan, I needed patience. He was careful, but I had one advantage. I was invisible to him. He never noticed me listening when he bragged on the phone, never paid attention when I quietly entered his study. I started gathering information, documents he left scattered, numbers he carelessly muttered. Soon I had a small notebook filled with his hidden sins, shady loans, unpaid investors, deals that were more scam than business. It was dangerous, yes, but it felt intoxicating. For once in my life, I had power over him, even if he didn't know it yet. Outwardly, nothing changed. At family dinners, I sat quietly while they dominated conversations. At gatherings, I accepted being pushed aside. They thought I had accepted my fate as the lesser child. But at night, alone in my room, I stared into the mirror and whispered, "Your time is coming." The pain of that night at the children's table fueled me like fire in my veins. My chance came sooner than expected. 2 months after the humiliating dinner, my parents announced another grand family celebration, Rehan's business expansion dinner. A glittering event with media invited, socialites attending, and every relative dressed in their best. I remember sitting silently as my father boasted, "This will be the biggest night of our family's honor. Everyone will see what my children have achieved." His words twisted like knives. Children. He didn't mean me. He never meant me. That night I decided their celebration would be my battlefield. For weeks I worked in silence. I collected enough evidence of Rehan's shady deals to crack his perfect mask. Bank statements, emails, screenshots, numbers scribbled on napkins. One by one, I stitched them together like a deadly quilt. For Anila, I reached out to someone I knew from university who had a growing online following. I slipped them edited photos of Anila, enough to spark rumors that her beauty wasn't natural. The gossip spread quietly, waiting to explode at the right time. And for my parents, well, their pride would collapse once their golden children fell. The night before Rehan's celebration, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. A part of me trembled. Was I really capable of this? They were my family. Blood. People are taught blood is sacred. But then I remembered the children's table. I remembered the laughter, the pointing, the humiliation that burned so deep I thought I would never heal. That wasn't family. That was betrayal. As the clock struck midnight, I whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow you will see me. Tomorrow you will learn what it feels like to be small, to be mocked, to be nothing. And I won't need to scream. I'll destroy you in silence, the same silence you caged me in for years." I closed my eyes, not in fear, but in anticipation, because tomorrow wasn't just Rehan's celebration. It was my rebirth. The night of Rehan's expansion gala arrived like a comet. Bright, dangerous, impossible to ignore. The ballroom in the downtown hotel had been transformed into a cathedral of success. Crystal chandeliers swayed, a string quartet hovered by the stage, and a wall of screens cycled through glossy slides of Rihan's achievements. Reporters lined one side, their notepads crisp and their eyes eager for quotes. Socialites posed beneath floral arches. Cameras captured every laugh and toast. My parents moved through the room like monarchs, proud smiles pasted on their faces. Anila floated by, draped in glitter, soaking up compliments. Rehan, center stage as always, smiled with practiced confidence, his handshake firm, his jaw immovable. He radiated the invincibility they had built for him over the years, and I wore a face like armor. I had rehearsed this night 1,000 times in my head, but rehearsal and reality still knew how to surprise me. My plan wasn't to shout or to walk on stage and shout accusations. I had learned that the most devastating reveal is quiet, precise, and irreversible. I had spent months building a paper trail, emails, invoices, and screenshots that exposed Rehan's double dealings. I'd made discreet copies of contracts showing conflicts of interest and payments that should never have been routed through his name. I had also fabricated, subtly and cleverly, some social media leaks to start a rumor train for Anila, a whisper of cosmetic procedures, a subtle set of doctored photos that made her insecurities bloom into panic. I knew how to plant doubt, and then let doubt eat a person's confidence from the inside out. The move that would crack everything was surgical. I had arranged, months ago, for an investigative journalist I'd been quietly feeding with truth and context to attend the gala. Not an angry tabloid, but someone reputable, someone who could write a piece that would make sponsors and investors flinch. I had sent the journalist an anonymized packet the night before, a tidy, overwhelming stack of documents with dates, wire transfers, and corroborating screenshots. I included a short note. You'll find the truth in the attachments. Check the corporate shell accounts. They lead back to loans, unpaid investors, and one very well-known exit strategy. When the journalist arrived, they introduced themselves to a PR manager and were swept into the flow. They were polite, professional, exactly the sort of person Rehan's people would never suspect. I watched from the bar as the reporter asked the right casual questions about future investments and nodded with interest at the answers, all while keeping their pad open and their eyes sharp. The first blade cut where I knew it would. The speech. Rehan climbed onto the stage, every inch the triumphant sun. He thanked the crowd, toasted to vision and integrity, and talked about growth, community, trust. The words sounded tinny in my ears. I clapped because clapping was expected. My hands did not tremble. Halfway through the speech, a polite interruption landed like a pebble in a pond. The MC, an MC handpicked by the PR team, welcomed a special guest to the mic. It was the journalist. They had been invited to read a short, unscheduled observation about corporate transparency. Rehan's PR manager shifted, surprised. Rehan blinked. The room hummed with confusion. The journalist smiled, leaned into the microphone, and said, "Tonight, as we celebrate growth, I want to remind everyone that growth must be built on truth." They unfolded a printed page and read, calm, even, devastating. First, timelines and dates. Then, corporate entities, shell companies, transactions that linked to Rehan's partners. They did not read everything aloud. Journalistic ethics and legal caution restrained them, but they did say enough for the room to catch the shape of it. Names were mentioned, numbers implied. People leaned forward. Cameras swiveled. That whisper of information was all it took. The immediate reaction was a ripple that became a wave. An investor near the front stiffened and checked their phone. Two sponsors exchanged worried glances. Rehan's confident smile faltered. He tried to laugh it off, to pivot, but the journalist had already posted the first teasing lines on their verified account. No accusations yet, just some very interesting documents seen tonight. We'll follow up. Within minutes, the feed lit up with speculation. For Rehan, the damage was twofold, public and private. Publicly, the suggestion that his expansion might be built on unstable foundations caused whispered skepticism. Privately, I had pulled a thread that would reveal whose pockets had been used to fund his success. Investors called. Rehan's phone buzzed nonstop. He tried to present calm in front of his parents, but his hands were cold and his smile mechanical. I watched him in a way I never had before, not as a brother, but as a man who had built his life on false pillars. While Rehan flailed in crisis management, My plan for Anila rolled forward with cruel precision. Anila's followers were loyal to her glamorous image. The rumor mill was about to turn that admiration into suspicion. I had arranged for several small-time influencers, friends of a friend, to casually start commenting on Anila's older photos, pointing out touch-ups and filters. They asked whether Anila's look was all natural and subtly praised the new trend of being honest about aesthetic enhancements. The comments were innocuous at first. Then, within an hour of the journalist's post, a gossip blog picked up the story of the alleged non-surgical enhancements, combining it with an offhand quote from someone who claimed falsely that modeling agencies preferred a fresh face. The blog didn't say much, but it used a photo I had edited, a close-up I'd blurred just enough to raise eyebrows. Within the hotel walls, a few cousins huddled near the dessert table whispering. Anila's laughter began to sound strained. I had expected tears, and there they were, much sooner than I'd thought. Anila slipped away to the restroom, makeup smudged, and I watched her from across the hall as she steadied herself with trembling hands. For a moment, I felt a sharp breach of the human compartments inside me. The memory of being the one laughed at in the children's table bled into the triumph I had planned. But I swallowed the sudden guilt hard. This wasn't simple cruelty. This was justice for every subtle humiliation, every time my existence had been rendered invisible. Rehan tried to salvage the night by issuing statements, smiling for cameras and talking about expansion strategy. But his words had the resilience of paper in rain. Within 12 hours, the journalist's investigation, compiled carefully, corroborated, and savage in its quiety, was live online. Rehan's primary investor released a statement saying they were reviewing their ties. Sponsors put press releases on standby. The hotel scrubbed photos from their social feed. Rehan's business phone turned into a litany of canceled meetings. The family's facade began to crack. My parents sat in a circle in a corner of the ballroom, faces pale, speaking in low, brittle voices. My father's jaw tightened, the pride he wore all his life suddenly looking small against the evidence stacked in the journalist's hands. He glanced at me once, a fleeting look that tried to place blame, accusation, or maybe salvage. He couldn't decide which. I sat with my drink untouched, feeling the old wound throb and a strange new sensation rise. A cold, steady satisfaction, but the coup de grace, my final, quiet sting, came the next day. I had arranged for the primary email evidence to be sent anonymously to several key people. An industry regulator, an old client who had been wronged by Rehan's early deals, and one particularly influential family friend who loved scandal like couture. The regulator issued a statement about a preliminary inquiry within 48 hours. The old client posted a public complaint. The family friend, with social circles that mattered, sent a carefully worded message to my parents' acquaintances, hinting at impropriety. The social circle turned its head. Invitations stopped coming for my parents. Their dinner table got a little quieter. Anila's followers dwindled. She started seeing messages from strangers asking about authenticity. She retreated into herself, and when she called our mother, her voice dissolved into shaky apologies and anger. Rehan's calls became frantic. He accused someone unknown of betrayal. He accused me at one point in a slip fueled by fear. My name fell like a coin between us, heavy, unclean, and impossible to ignore. I had wanted to avoid direct confrontation. I had wanted the world to do the punishing work. But that night, after the first headlines faded and the family assembled in the living room under the dim lamp, Rehan walked in late, his usual swagger gone. He found me at the window. He didn't storm. He didn't shout. He looked at me like someone seeing a stranger steal his reflection. "Was it you?" he asked. I turned slowly. The silence between us felt like a verdict. I could have lied. I could have played the wounded sister. But the truth had a different power altogether. "Yes," I said softly. "It was me." For a moment, the room shrank to the space between his stunned face and my steady one. My parents looked up, mouths open. Anila, fragile now, put her hand to her throat like she couldn't breathe. Rehan's voice was a bare thing. "Why, Amen? Why would you do this to us?" "Because you did it to me first," I answered. "You built your empire on my silence. You fed on my invisibility. You humiliated me in front of the whole family. You put me at a children's table and expected me to smile." For a beat, he stared. Then his face twisted, not with rage so much as bewilderment. Betrayal, it turns out, is sharper when the betrayer is family. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I studied the awful, simple truth like a mirror, placed it before them, and let the shards cut where they would. That night was not the end. It was the opening of wounds and the start of reckonings. My revenge had been executed in cold, quiet measures. Public exposure, social unraveling, and the erosion of fragile pride. But it also opened something else, an inevitable cascade of consequences that would test how far I was willing to go, and how much I could survive. As I lay awake that night, the city lights a smear across my window. I felt hollow and powerful at once. I had achieved what I set out to do. The family's pedestal had been knocked, and in the rubble I saw a new shape for myself. But I also knew this. Revenge is never a single act. It is a season, and seasons change people. The weeks after the gala felt like living inside a photograph that someone else had ruined with acid. Headlines blurred into conversation topics, then into bitter jokes at family gatherings I no longer felt welcome at. Rehan's empire, once polished and unshakable, showed hairline fractures that widened with each passing day. Anila retreated from public life, her scheduled shoots canceled, invitations dwindling. My parents oscillated between denial and shame, two moods that were awful to witness because they were both so human, but consequences were not limited to the outside world. The house I grew up in, the one with the chipped teacups and the old grandfather clock, transformed under the pressure of unspoken blame. My father stopped beginning sentences with pride and instead began every conversation with caution. My mother would glance at me across the dinner table, eyes that searched for approval, for reconciliation, for a balm that I did not have. They wanted me to apologize. They wanted the old Eamon back, quiet, compliant, the child who forgave with a smile and pretended nothing had happened. Sometimes I almost believed I could go back, to the way I'd fold myself small so that others could take up more room. But the children's table sat like a scar I could not ignore. The memory of being made small in front of strangers and family had embedded itself in me like a warning. I had not pulled the thread of their reputations for sport. I had pulled it because for years they had pulled me apart. Legal processes crept in like winter. Regulators were thorough and surgical. They asked questions that made Rehan flinch, and the more he tried to explain, the more holes opened in his accounts. Investors who once toasted him in glossy ads began to distance themselves. No one wants their name attached to a scandal. Rehan's business faced penalties and audits. Some partners quietly cut ties. In private, he turned to our parents, demanding support, pleading for protection, and I watched the ridiculousness of it all. A grown man, whose confidence had been carved from his parents' praise, suddenly stripped down to bargaining and pleading. Anila, whose life was built on image, took the fall differently. Her withdrawal was the kind that makes the rest of the family feel guilty and useless all at once. She stopped answering calls, then began answering with clipped, rehearsed sentences. Once, I found her standing in front of the mirror in our old shared bathroom, lips trembling, hands clutching the edges of the sink as if to hold herself together. I could have gone to her then, offered comfort the way sisters sometimes do. Instead, I walked away. That decision felt like a verdict I had already passed on myself long ago. Word got to me that distant relatives began to whisper, choosing sides or keeping silent to protect invitations and status. My parents' social circle thinned. Where once their nights had been full of dinners and outings, they now spent evenings watching the news and clicking links that documented their children's undoing. That kind of solitude is corrosive. It makes people search for someone to blame, and if there is no obvious villain, they will sometimes invent one. For a while I was that invention. There were days I wondered if I had miscalculated. Revenge is seductive, yes, but also unstable. It changes the geometry of relationships in ways you can't predict. I began to feel the cost beyond the immediate satisfaction. Dinners where my seat was physically present but emotionally empty. Neighborhood mornings where familiar faces averted their eyes. The small kindnesses that had once meant everything, now given with asterisks. I had wanted justice, but what I had also sown was a new loneliness. Heavier than embarrassment. The loneliness of someone who had exposed family secrets and watched the scaffolding of their life fall. And yet, there were moments, the tiny, quiet ones, that felt like truth. One afternoon, after a long round of phone calls and a heated meeting with lawyers, I walked past the community center where I had volunteered as a teenager. A woman who ran the after-school program recognized me from years before. She paused, then smiled. "We need people like you," she said simply. handing me a flyer about a mentorship program for young women entering the workforce. Not praise, not fear. Just a practical request. Someone acknowledging capability. I accepted the flyer, and later, I showed up. The work was ordinary but real. Helping a 19-year-old rewrite a resume, guiding a young mother through a budget, teaching a nervous student how to answer interviews. In the way that small daily tasks restore the sense that you are useful for the right reasons, the mentorship work healed something I didn't know was frayed. It reminded me that identity is not only what other people confer on you. It is also what you build when no one is watching. Family dynamics shifted. My parents attempted reconciliation at first the way people approach a fragile vase, hands trembling, fingers careful. They sent texts that said, "Can we talk?" I met them in the kitchen one evening. The conversation was not dramatic. It was a thumping monologue from my father about reputation and fear, and a softer, muffled apology from my mother that always sounded like it was meant to be about the weather. They asked me to forgive them for interfering in my life, for letting me down. I listened. I told them, truthfully, that I did not crave their approval anymore. I told them that forgiveness was a process they could start if they wanted, but not one I would hurry to grant, because the hurt had roots that ran deep. When Rayhan asked to see me alone, his voice was stripped of the arrogance I had known. He came into the small cafe near our childhood neighborhood with a hand tremor I'd never seen before. "Amen," he said, "I need to understand. I need to know why." I told him what I had told the family in that small, factual voice, the memory of the children's table, the note of humiliation, how long it had hollowed me out. I watched him swallow, not in anger this time, but in a kind of stunned recognition. He apologized, offered a clumsy, sincere apology that did not erase consequences, but at least tried to place the first stone of repair. "Will you forgive me?" he asked. "Forgiveness isn't a switch," I told him. "It's a season. Maybe someday. Right now, I'm learning to breathe on my own." He left with a heavier step than he'd ever had, and for the first time, I didn't want to call him back. I didn't need him to confess or to grovel. I wanted him to wake up and build a life without stepping on other people to get there. The aftermath stretched into months. Rayhan's business regrouped under new management. Still wounded but resilient in a way that made me uncomfortable. People adapt, find loopholes, and sometimes the guilty reinvent themselves into something less obvious. Anila slowly returned to social media, but her posts were different. Hazed, reflective, less gleeful. Our parents, chastened, moved through the days with less certainty and more care. The neighborhood no longer buzzed with gossip because other news took its place. Life, stubborn and indifferent, went on. For me, the most crucial change was internal. The nights I had once spent replaying Humiliation were now interrupted by plans. I used the money I'd saved from a small inheritance to enroll in night classes, business ethics and nonprofit management, subjects that felt like both penance and preparation. The mentorship program expanded, and I found a quiet joy in watching girls who once thought their future small begin to imagine it bigger. People began to ask me for advice about careers, about dignity, about how to leave a toxic environment. That felt like a more valuable power than the one I had used to pull my family down. There were nights when I still felt the cold aftertaste of the gala's success. The sight of my family's faces when the journalist had spoken aloud the evidence. Those images were etched in me, neither wholly proud nor fully regretful. Revenge had been a teacher. It had shown me the price of being invisible and taught me how to reclaim a voice. But it also taught me that retribution is a double-edged blade. It can free you and it can scar you. Years later, I would set a table of my own. Not a children's table, not a display for status. Just a long wooden table in a modest apartment, mismatched chairs, warm light, friends and mentees laughing and talking. I would not invite those who had laughed at me to sit there. I would invite people who made room for others without calculating value. I would cook, sometimes burn a dish, and we would eat anyway. That table would be my answer. Less theatrical than revenge, quieter than a courtroom, but kinder and far more durable. On an ordinary evening after a day of classes, a woman from the mentorship program hugged me before leaving. "You changed my resume," she said. "But more than that, you showed me how to explain my worth." That line lodged in me like a promise kept. In the end, justice had not been merely the public unraveling of my family's illusions. Justice for me was learning to say no to being small. It was building a life that could hold me when others would not. I did not close the book on them entirely. Time would do much of the work that vengeance begun. Soften edges, force reckonings, allow new patterns. But I had done what I needed to do. I had moved from the children's table to a place of my choosing. And when I looked back, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with relief, I could at least tell myself the truth. I had refused to be invisible any longer. That, in the end, was the revenge that mattered most. Not to break them, but to make sure I would never again allow someone else to tell me where I belonged.